I call this October 8th, 2024 work session to order. Will the staff have any comments?
I'll save my comments for the regular meeting at 7, so no comments at this time.
Very good. Let's move on to the topic, which is the police station site selection. Please introduce yourself. And
Chief Nickel,
what?
Deputy City Manager Jason Bickling. And yeah, we just wanted to come before you tonight, kind of like we did with the fire department. It was a number of months ago. And as you guys know, City Council did commission a feasibility study around public safety, which combined both the police department and fire departments. And so we brought to you, we had the fire department discussion, and the feasibility study kind of looks at two different things. As one, it looks at the space and the structure that the department works in, and then it also looks at site selection. So with the police department, there's some different things came out of that, which we'll get into in a little bit. And again, this is also to just the fact that we know in the past that the city administration has not done a great job about including the Planning and Zoning Commission on things that kind of fall within their purview, either under the comprehensive plan or the muni land plan. And so tonight we are not looking for like a formal recommendation of any kind, but we do want to have just get input from you guys, because we do feel like that's important, especially as you guys are always looking at the muni land plan every year and the comprehensive plan and stuff like that. So again, we want to share information with you and make sure that you guys are in the loop of the discussions that we are having place as we kind of plan for the city needs in 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now. And we're partnering with you to do that. So what I wanted to kind of talk to you guys about first, do you guys have this PowerPoint in your packet there? Can you see this?
Yes.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is I just want to do like a little review of kind of the process that R&M did. And if you guys, I believe you guys had it, it may have been included before, but if you guys would like us to send you like the full feasibility study anytime, we can do that. I think it's 300 some odd pages, but we can give it to community development staff and they can forward that on to you. So if you really want to get into the details. So if you look at kind of the project overview process and history page, which I think is the second slide there, you can see on the right that basically there's 3 different steps there, and they look kind of comprehensively of what we currently have, and then based on kind of what we know as there's things like codes, there's best practices, and then they kind of project that out to what we need based on our current capacity. Step 2 is identify potential sites, and they really had a lot of criteria around that. And then step 3 is looking at like conceptual design and funding options. And so anyway, those are the steps that R&M went through with all of with both departments. So here we go. So before I turn it over to kind of Chief Nickel here, is when we look at the Seward Police Department, it also includes police dispatch and the DMV. The DMV is kind of this more like almost like a contractual type of thing where we have these services because it's good for our community. A lot of times in other communities, the city doesn't have anything to do with it, but if the city did not have anything to do with it here, we probably wouldn't have it. I would say another pretty big function includes the lost and found. There are so many things that get turned in up there, and so many people come in looking for things. So that is kind of like, especially around the 4th of July, you get like, but all the time we have like cell phones and wallets and keys and all kinds of stuff. And even if you see on like Facebook or something like that, people post, "Hey, I found this," they're turning it into dispatch. And so that is an important function that they do carry out that some people might not think of. We have animal control, which we have a great facility for that kind of that function comes out of. And then There's something we're gonna talk about specifically more tonight, and that's acting as an emergency operations center, which we don't, I would say that right now, the council chambers kind of tends to, when we do have to do that, it happens here, but it is not the best place for it at all. And so, the last thing I wanted to mention is before we turn kind of that over and let Chief Nickel kind of talk about things, is that the police department has, when they're fully staffed, they have up to 11 officers and they have six dispatch?
Yes.
So you have roughly 18, 17 staff people working. And if you look next door, this is like that's their office over there, and it is actually not it's not any bigger than this room right here that they have those people working out of at all times. And so it is very, very tight, which you'll be able to see in the pictures here. So, I think just out of function of obviousness, and Chief Nuck will get into the details of kind of what an adequate police department would look like.
Thanks, Jason. So next, I'll start off with the goal of this project. Like it says there, we need to improve some operational deficiencies, increase ability to provide our effective services, increase public access while protecting privacy, and so on. To give you some idea of that, for those of you that are familiar with the dispatch window over there in the hallway, a lot of people from the public come in and they have to kind of tell us what's going on at that window. And there's no privacy there, you know, and so you can just imagine if you're trying to report something that's very, embarrassing or whatever, just very emotionally charged, that's not a good place to do that, and never has been. So, and like Jason pointed out, being in such a confined space, even once you come inside, we don't have a good place to meet with people and do interviews and things like that. It's just things that we've definitely outgrown it, and I would argue that it was really never good to begin with. So we're past due. So moving on to the next one. So this is going to be your page with the graphs. I guess the first thing that I would point out there is just, the red and the green bars are showing you our current need and our future need. The blue is showing you kind of where we're at. And so it's clear that pretty much across the board, we're just not meeting our needs. And, one piece of good news with this one is the numbers down below. You can see where they kind of tallied everything up in square footage and what we would need. And so basing it off of just the future need there, that says, 19,000 some odd square feet. I would just point out up there that the Department of Motor Vehicles can stay here. And so we don't actually need to put that into our build. And then the detention part of it has now closed. We've closed the jail here, and we're taking inmates over to Spring Creek or transporting to Wildwood. And so without that significant portion in this build, it becomes quite a bit smaller. It brings our square footage down to around 15,480 needed square feet. So considerable savings. I mean, especially if you start, doing some math on just how much square footage costs, to save thousands of square feet is significant. So,
And I think one of the things I was talking to Chief Knuckle about earlier is that I think it's hard for us when this is all we know and see what a typical police department looks like, but like the officers there, if you go into their room, it is very tight and compact, but most police departments have things like lockers in case they need to change, and locker rooms. It's important for them to be able to, depending on the situation, they can change into a uniform. They can take showers. I mean, like, this is like what normal police departments function like. They have storage for evidence. They have, if they're processing, if they come upon like chemicals, they have, that's put in a certain area too, certain types of drugs specifically. And so, yeah, there's just a lot of really functional, like, safe working conditions and pieces that we just do not, they just don't have. And then I also think too that when we're looking at hiring new officers, you know, if the pay being equal, if you go to some place that has a really nice facility, they have nice lockers, they have just a great place, like a workspace, they are so crunched in there, like I don't know how they work. And when they have to do a lot of like filling out paperwork and reports and that type of thing. But if given two equal pay, the two separate spaces, like this is severely inadequate. And I think it's a little bit of a detractor, honestly, when especially if they're used to working somewhere else and we're trying to hire like especially experienced officers away. So I just wanted to kind of interject that, just because I've learned a lot when you go through these things, that there's always a lot of learning and just kind of the practicalities of the inadequacies of that. And also too, we do want to keep the DMV here in this building because I think it makes the most sense to keep DMV in City Hall. This is where so often people will go to the DMV, they're like, I need a utility bill. And what do? They just come downstairs, they grab their utility bill, we print it out for them, and they take a walk back upstairs. And so there's not really a need to have the DMV be in a separate facility than it is now. And I think it makes most sense for the public to have access to that in this building, just because that's kind of, I think it'd be very frustrating if you're like, I mean, I have to go drive like across town or wherever this ends up being, and to get a utility bill and come back and all that kind of stuff. So we do think that DMV is best, and it's actually, ironically, DMV has actually the most, like, they fit their space now and they're not too far off from where they should be, so.
Yeah, thank you. That's all great points. The recruiting and retention portion really can't be understated. You know, I mean, currently my department is looking at we've almost fallen down to about 50% manning, and I'm staying afloat by bringing in temporary employees, and that's not a situation that we want to be in. So, you know, when a potential applicant brings up a picture of the Seward Police Department, there isn't one. I mean, they bring up City Hall, you know, and so there's no association there. And then they come in for an in-person interview, and they're sitting in this super crowded and old and just not attractive space, you know. And so I feel it definitely impacts us, and we can do better. So.
That next slide.
So, yeah, the next slide here, the existing conditions, it kind of starts to show you, you know, just what we're up against here. We crowd as much stuff into the offices, the space that we have available that we can. As Jason mentioned before, you know, if you go to another department, typically, like, I mean, the closest next department is going to be Soldotna, and if you go over there and you go into their squad room, every officer has their own cubicle. They co-located the officers into one big room that's about the size of this room, but they've set up cubicles so each person has their own workspace, which is really nice, you know. And nowadays, with the amount of paperwork that we have to handle, and you know, just the amount of time that we spend really at the desk instead of out fighting crime, you really need that. You know, when I started, that wasn't necessarily the case. Things were different then, you know, back in the early 2000s, and you know, you had like one page and you could handwrite your report, and that was for almost everything. And nowadays it's hours upon hours of computer generated report writing, and you're just doing lots of typing and things like that. It's just way different. The top picture on on my right, with the guy in the red shirt, that's our entryway, and that's what I was telling you about. You know, if you were to come in and you're trying to tell us what's going on with you, you're kind of doing it in that room, you know, and it's very crowded, as you can see. I mean, there's barely any room with just him in there, and then you get, you know, one of us and a couple people in there, and that space is now full. And so, it's just not a good place for us to be able to sit down and talk to somebody like we should be able to. The picture next to that is our records room. It's extremely tight down there, and that space is shared with our armory and a portion of our equipment storage. That room is just simply not efficient. And then through the door that it's looking at there is evidence storage, which those really need to get separated out. You know, records should be off to its own, and then evidence should be its own, and so on. So kind of in the middle left, that's our squad room. So that's the space that eight people are supposed to share if we were fully staffed. So currently we have space in there basically for 2 people to sit and work, and then we have a lot of extra chairs, you know. So again, it's just not really enough room. I won't worry about the big photo. That's the jail storage room. When we originally took that photo, you know, we were back in that time we were still operating a jail. So that's a little bit different, but just another really kind of crowded space. It has jail and patrol stuff in it.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Just backing up one slide to 6, the space planning summary site, that little square is that your footprint space? It says 800 square foot and then 8750, but you noted that you needed 15,480 square feet, and I see where you got that number, but what's the site development? Is that just the footprint that we're on now, the 800 square feet?
Existing square
yes.
footage. Oh, I see where you're at. Okay. Yes, I believe that's right. They're saying that you have that page. This one, let's see. Space planning summary site.
And then just while he's looking that up, question for Mr. Bickling, is there, what percentage for what you have planned, and what percentage are you at of what level of percentage are you at of development?
We're at not any level yet. And so the way
Well, I mean,
that.
the planning, you need like to be at 15%.
Yeah, so, and
right?
then, so
So
this is one of the steps in the process of getting 15%, is you do a feasibility study.
Right.
And that just kind of tells you what your need is on like what kind of facility you have to have, what are the current kind of like standards, like both fire department, police department have working standards, there's best practices, and so once they conduct the feasibility study, it gives you kind of an idea of like the footprint that you need and what each area your department needs, and then that just gives you information that you can then take into that 15% design process, because then you at least have, okay, we know we're going to need this much square feet. There's obviously some different types of configurations depending on the site that you can put that square feet in. One thing also too that is that's not really in that right there, but obviously with police departments you need like an area to place like patrol vehicles. That's if you look out here, this like City Hall parking lot back here becomes like this gridlock in the wintertime of like getting cars out from underneath snow, and if an officer's out for a few days because on vacation, his car gets parked, and so like so there's like parking. They're gonna need certain types of parking. It's good for them to have like a covered pull through. Some of those other things that aren't necessarily shown there, but those would get kind of brought into as the next step would be to go into the 15% design, and so that way we have that kind of conceptual look, so that we can pursue funding.
Because you said it was 300, the full report is 300 pages, right?
Yeah, and that was a combined feasibility study for both. It was a public safety feasibility study, so that includes both the fire department and police department. But it's, I mean, you know, it's just a lot of fine details on all their findings, and you know, they took lots and lots more pictures. So.
Commissioners, I'd like to have the whole presentation and then questions. If you could please save those for the end. Thank you.
So again, that's the footprint then?
Right, so
Okay.
what I believe that is it's the amount of square footage that the police department itself is currently setting on, and the amount of square footage they estimate that we would need to, you know, to fit our building onto if we were to move it. So it's, I think the way that they're trying to show that is sort of, if you could imagine it as a pad of, say, concrete sitting over here versus another one over here. This one would be 800 square feet,
Yeah,
this one would
okay.
be
Thank you.
87.
I just needed some
Yeah.
clarification, so
Yeah.
I didn't want to miss it.
Okay, we had another page of just continuing existing conditions. Again, the first one from the left there is in the jail, and then the next one is actually my office, which is, yeah, super crowded. Oddly, I had the deputy chief sitting behind me and the sergeant tried to come in my office today, and the deputy chief had to drag a seat over, like, we closed the door and then he dragged a seat over there so he could sit there and see me, and while the sergeant could sit on the other side because of, you know, computer screen, and there's just like, it's just crazy. You just shouldn't have to do that kind of stuff. So, oh, and then the last one there on the right is that hallway with the window that we had already talked about. So, you know, sort of that community hallway really shouldn't be part of our functions. So,
Can we go just
Sure.
talk about it? So, one of the things that R&M did for when we were looking at it, we were looking at both sites kind of together. Not really both sites together. We're looking at like, okay, could we do separate facilities and combined facilities? But if you can see that there's the lot considerations are they kind of run everything through. They look at a lot and they do all these kind of check boxes, and they came up with these like grids and scoring and stuff like that, which is another reason why that feasibility study was so large, because of some of that type of work. But fire departments and police departments have a little bit different needs or emphasis when you look at some of those things. A lot of times you look at like fire trucks, they have very big vehicles, they have short turning radius, they don't have great turning radiuses, and so there's certain types of highway accesses that they need. You don't want them making like a lot of turns coming onto the highway, where the police department, a lot of times they respond from being out in the field anyway. And so there are just some different types of needs, but then there's also very much some similar ones. And one thing too, I just want to mention again, because I think it's important, is that when R&M looked at the sites in the city for looking at, they wanted to look at everything that might possibly fit. And so that means even if it's like, if it's a city property, if it's a private property, if it's, even though like that person might not have any kind of intent, it's just important for them to be able to do a lot of different comparisons for different properties, even though it's, I mean, so you'll see in some of the ones we looked at. It's more of just to understand the process and to help when you do come up with the selection, it kind of strengthens that one. And so, anyway, we'll get into the different site selections, but one of the things that came out of this as well when we were looking at the fire department and the police department, like as a combined facility or separate facilities. Most of the time when people have a combined facility, it's because there's a significant financial savings. And for us, that was not the case for this. When they looked at there's not really any financial savings. But the other thing that came out of this is that it's, when you have, you could say, your two probably most vital response agencies, you don't want them co-located for redundancy purposes. You want them in separate locations, because if something happens at one site, that happens at both sites, and then you kind of get some things taken out. And especially when we're looking at the Emergency Operations Center, which we'll get into, that has some very specific places that need to be in a different geographic location than like the fire department was chosen at. So, and I would say the biggest thing is that we need that EOC outside of, as much as outside as possible from the tsunami inundation. Where if we look at those big, huge, well, not big, huge, but they're very, the inundation is very huge, but the places where the areas that are in town that we have that's kind of out of that, we have the area that's up here by the hospital. And then we have the area that kind of up by the middle school, high school, kind of back up in there, those areas. Those are really kind of like the, you know, like the Hilltop area. Middle school, high school are both really good. Anyway, just in that direction, and actually the high school is the shelter, the emergency shelter area. When we have had to set up emergency shelters, all our equipment's up there, that's where we set it up. And so it is very important that when we're looking at the EOC function, that it needs to be as much as possible like in one of those places, so.
Okay, so that's a good segue into the Emergency Operations Center portion of this, and just, you know, for the public and anybody that's not familiar with Emergency Operations Centers, what that is a physical location in which the leaders of the city can come together and manage an incident. So they'll, you know, it also gives our partners in the borough and the state a place to come and meet with us as well. So we can, you know, coordinate all of the supplies that we need and where our efforts are going and so on and so forth. For the purpose of this police department building, this would be a permanent facility which is going to be hardened against natural disasters like what Mr. Bickling had said, you know, with tsunamis, earthquakes, flooding, so on and so forth. So to the best of our ability, we want to prevent any natural disasters from being able to take out this building, and it needs to be able to survive those events. And then another consideration for this is just to be able to protect it from unauthorized entry. So that's another form of hardening. So the trouble right now for the city is, as Mr. Bickling mentioned, we're kind of in the EOC right now. The 50-foot tsunami line is right outside these windows. So basically, Fifth Avenue is that line. And if you talk to people that were here in the '64 quake, they say that the water went right down Fifth Avenue right outside this room. So that's obviously too close for comfort and not a good choice. We're also perfectly positioned for Lowell Creek flooding should something happen. So if the tunnel failed, you know, if we had a significant enough, say, earthquake event to cause the tunnel to collapse, then the water would back up and it would start to come down Jefferson Avenue just like it always had in nature. Another consideration that we've worried about for years is if an avalanche or a landslide took place up in Lowell Canyon and it creates a dam, and then, you know, water builds up, dam breaks, and then we would have a tremendous flooding event that would come right through, you know, it would come downtown, it would hit this building, it would kind of spread out, as you can imagine, like a river delta would, and we'd be looking at significant destruction down here. So that's not good for us either. And then the last thing I would say about an emergency operations center currently is that we don't have a backup. you know, we don't have a good backup for this place. And so, you know, with a building that's already kind of compromised and not having a backup, you know, we're just not in good shape here for our emergency operations needs. And so, with that said, you know, I went to FEMA on this one, and they put out a guide for us to look at, and you know, they brought up a lot of these concerns. So we have floodplains and seismic hazards like the faults and liquefaction zones, and so on and so forth. And then additionally, they tell us that we shouldn't put an emergency operations center next to high-risk locations, structures, or infrastructure, you know, airfields, airports, railroads, so on. You know, these are big ticket items that, you know, you don't want to be too close to the emergency, and you don't want those potential emergencies to take out your emergency operations center if something should go wrong with them. So, and then the last thing that I've thrown in as a consideration is just, you know, with the world we live in mind, it seems like every day almost we turn on the news and we hear about another school shooting or some other active shooter event. It's my opinion that one of the most important things that the police department does is, you know, we protect our kids here. And so, you know, having the ability to respond quickly to the schools is very important. And this is another good reason for, at least for me, that this new facility be located as close to the schools as we can get it. You know, time is absolutely of the essence. Should, God forbid, something like this ever happen. And, you know, I think we have just a really good opportunity here. And like Mr. Vickling said, the high school is our shelter. So, you know, having us close by to help manage something like that in the event of an emergency would be really helpful as well. So the sites considered, you know, like Mr. Bickling mentioned, when R&M did their study, they just kind of pulled samples all over the place. And so what I'll do is just kind of take you through these individually, starting with City Hall. And as you can see, what I did was I just kind of took a look at each of these properties, and I pulled out what I thought were pros and cons to make it a little bit more digestible. And I don't, should we really kind of?
Yeah, I think that you guys, if you want to, you kind of look at the details, but I think we've covered a lot of that. And again, but I do, what I want to do is I want to go to the, basically kind of what we've narrowed it down is, we haven't narrowed it down to a property at all. We just have properties that we know that would be a good location, but we don't really, we haven't made the decision there. Do you want to just forward on to those?
Okay.
And what was really interesting is that I do want to mention that the Fort Raymond property, that was looked at for both, but again, that was close to schools, but it was not high enough to be like truly out. And then two, there's a significant like traffic issue there as well. So, but I would say that kind of going into this, and I don't want people to get upset like that they're going to put the police station on the Jesse Lee Home property. That's not what we're saying here at all. But what we're saying is that like if we were to look at this property, like this is the type of property we're looking for. It's at the right size. It's out of the inundation zone. It's near the schools. And so there are some properties, and the fact that this is a city property, you always want to look at city properties. So anyway, this would be like a good example of what the city is kind of looking for, something like this, as far as location, access, and you know, you can see the kind of the pros and the cons. If anyone's curious, we are still dealing with cleanup on that site. unfortunately. So you want to go to that next one? So this is a private property that's right, actually, kind of almost adjacent to the Jesse Lee property. And that was, this is also like a really, you look at this, this is like, it checks the boxes. It's close to schools, it's out of the inundation zone. It's not near like the airport, railroad power lines, not the flood zone. Anyway, so this property is like an acre bigger, which is always nice to have a little bit more space. So that way you're not crammed on a lot necessarily, but you can have more parking, landscaping. You want to go to the next one as well? And then too, like we have the property that's adjacent to the hospital. I would say that this is another one that it sits up in the zone. There are some things that are not, I believe this is owned by the Seward Community Health Center. But anyway, these are just types of typical properties that we're kind of looking at. We have not found a property yet, and it's an ongoing search. But anyway, just these are kind of what would be a good potential location to have some serious discussions around. And so, anyway, we just want to. I think if you want to, you can go back and read kind of why some of the other properties didn't work. But yeah, so this is the cost estimations. We're kind of wrapping up till the end here. You guys can ask some questions, but this was the preliminary cost estimations, and you can see that there was not like a significant difference between a combined facility and individual facilities. And then two, now like that cost will probably come down for the police department, because if we're going to keep the DMV here and we no longer have the detention, especially the detention is a very high cost portion of that facility, very high cost. And so being able to move those two kind of pieces out of those plans will lower that cost pretty significantly, which is good. We want to be as efficient as possible. Then is there one more page after this?
We have a couple more.
Okay. And so we do have, ultimately, like the reason why we're kind of having this conversation and we're moving this down the pathway, like Commissioner Hubbard talked about earlier, is we've learned that we need to get all of these to like a 15% design, so that way they're kind of at the least cheapest ready state that we can really seriously pursue funding, because we as a community cannot afford really to build a facility like that. People cannot afford the mill rate to just try and make a bond for it or something like that. And so this is like the way that we can that we have to pursue funding so that we can get this built for our community. So, and it's probably not going to be like one thing, but hopefully like there's probably a combination of things. If we really hit it right, you could get a really large one. But there's lots of state and federal grants that we'll be looking at pursuing for the police department specifically.
And I would just add to that the Emergency Operations Center portion of this makes it, I think, very attractive for grants. It's one of those things that the government wants us to have, for sure. And they understand the importance of being able to manage emergencies, so.
And especially given the community's profile for some natural disaster risks, I think those two things really kind of go hand in hand. And so with earthquakes and tsunamis, which are kind of like, they lay over each other, but yeah, those are, we feel like we fit a good profile that people would be interested, so. Basically, again, like we just want to bring this to you guys to get your input and to see kind of where we're going, because we really feel like this commission, with the comprehensive plan and with your familiarity with the community land plan and just with the workings of planning and zoning, and that this is what you guys do. And so we just want to bring this before you guys, have questions. We'd love to hear comments or ideas that you guys might have around these things, and not just tonight, but at any time after this point in time. And then what we're going to be doing you know, we would still like to, obviously we do not need to find a site at some point in time. Now, given we don't need to find one tomorrow, we are still going to look at moving forward with going to 15% design for concepts. It's kind of like a chicken or the egg thing first, but if we can get funding with a concept, that's what we'd like to do. And that way you're moving towards that goal, and that way if some land comes up, in the meantime, great. If it doesn't, if you can get funding, then maybe you can purchase some private land, or depending on what other public land we have available, but we don't have a lot up there. So anyway, you just kind of have to take the next right step, and that's kind of what we're doing here. And so we're happy to answer any questions that you guys might have about the feasibility study or any of the sites. And just thank you for your time. We appreciate what you guys do.
Thank you. Commissioners, do you have any questions?
I have a couple if it's okay. For the EOC and the police department itself, are they supposed to be somewhat co-located, or are they separate entities?
Well, I guess that depends on who you talk to. The general consensus is that they can be separated, I think, but I see a huge value in having them together, particularly with the kind of, like if you guys are paying attention to the recent council meetings, we made a significant purchase of a CAD, which is computer-aided dispatch and report management system. And part of this computer-aided dispatch program is we'll be able to throw up, for example, on a screen like that, where all of the apparatus in the city are. You know, police cars, fire trucks, you know, hypothetically, I believe the plan is to do this, but I don't want to speak out of turn for Doug or, you know, electric, but we can locate all of the city's vehicles, and so to be able to easily share something like that, and you know, to be able to sit in an emergency operations center and be able to really direct your resources in real time and to specific locations like that would be amazing. You know?
The reason why I'm sort of asking is because the pre-positioning, sort of the, you know, the ICS positionings for each one of those desk personnel, that having that as adjacent to the cop shop, so to speak, and then you have the electronics and the comms already established. You don't have to all of a sudden drag everything in and set it up,
Yeah.
which I think if you have a universal power supply or whatever it is that you have, and that sort of dovetails with my questions that I'll probably ask you later on an off-site kind of thing about the dispatch and the equipment and the dispatch things, because of the control of the environment, because of how warm it gets, knowing, having worked in dispatches and understand how that goes, because one system goes down, whether it's the CAD system or whether it's one of these other ones, that, you know, you're sort of SOL if you don't have some sort of redundant capability. And if you have to jump over to the EOC to utilize something along the lines while something's down, at least you don't have too much time that you're down for stuff. But so I like the redundancy, and I also really do like the fact that the EOC is right next to, would be, thought process is right next to the cop shop.
And one thing that we haven't really mentioned here, but it has been a topic of conversation that would be interesting to look at further, that is kind of based on that, is that we know that the troopers kind of, their space has kind of been moved around a lot. And so, something fell through with Bear Creek at one point in time, but I do think that if we had conversations beforehand and we said, hey, if we were able to build this facility bigger, would you lease space from us, like for like a long-term relationship, and be able to like share resources? And so it could be kind of, that's not a bad thing either necessarily, but you know, but that was kind of the EOC piece and communications. I think we do think it is really important, like Chief said, to be able to have those co-located, and also when you set something up like that, but for the police department too, like you put it, it's got its own generator. It can stand alone by itself all day long, no matter what else is going on around the city. And so that's good for the police department and the EOC.
Yeah.
And also too, for those of you guys not familiar with the EOC, that's, I mean, that is like, if we were to have a natural disaster, that's where everyone would gather. That's where they would be like directing Public Works to be like, hey, we need this like road cleared out immediately so we can get emergency vehicles here. And we can be talking to Anchorage, we can be talking to Soldotna, like, hey, this is what we need here. We need this brought in at the airport. We need, and so all of that, it's basically like a war room, you could say, of when you're managing all kinds of situations. You're calling for medical help. You know, you're dealing with transport of people that are injured. All that stuff takes place in that room, and so it's just, it's vital. I feel like it's not a matter of if, but when we are going to have to use that at some point in time, and if not in our lifetime, in our kids' lifetimes, and we want to make sure that they're adequately prepared, and we feel like this is one of those things. So that's really important.
Any other comments from commissioners or questions?
Yeah, I have a couple here. You said, so the EOC, it's not incorporated into what you have listed in page 6 of everything, so how much square footage are we talking for that, and are we talking 2 different buildings here? And
No, it would be the same building. You know, on the list here, kind of the way I've envisioned this is having multiple use spaces, you know, to optimize the square footage that we get. So on like the first one there, you have the public access zone, and one of the things that we've talked about with that is having a large meeting space, you know, a training space, and you could just immediately flip this over and become the EOC space. So multiple roles within the same space. So if that makes sense to you. So.
And then on the property on Benson and Sweatman, I'm trying to find that or place that. Is that a zone? Are all the places you picked zoned for this type of thing, or would be some places need a conditional use permit?
Yeah, we didn't really look at the zoning so much as we know that like police departments, you can usually put those in proximity to like residential districts. It's not really a problem. But we were just looking more for the appropriate location, and so the one on Sweatman and Benson, you said that you're looking at.
Yeah.
So as you're going into like, as you're getting ready to go, like you turn and you go in, like you're gonna go to the high school. It's actually sitting right. It's a property you almost don't even know is there. Until you look, you're like, oh, it's a forest, and you think it's probably just part of the borough property, but it's actually a private property that sits right there, and there's a house that sits back on that far corner. If you go into the Jesse Lee property, there's a house that sits on the back corner, but there's 3 acres right there. So we were just looking mostly for like location and size, if that fit.
I'm curious how many acres you need.
But, well, and I think what they said that like kind of the absolute minimum, I believe, was about 2. But that was like, you might have to get creative with your building at that point. But obviously some more is better, especially when you're considering like parking, having adequate parking and having public access. But they said that 2 acres was gonna be kind of like the minimum. I'd have to go back and look at the report. Actually, it's a funny thing, I'm sitting here looking right here. It's like they said kind of the smallest bound would be 1.8, 2.1 acres around in there, but really if you could get, you know, we talked about too having a couple more acres, and because the other thing is too is that have you guys seen the Chugach obviously clinic that's going up? Like the landscaping is really nice. It looks really good.
Yeah, it does.
And it looks fantastic, and that's so. I think sometimes it does not hurt to have extra space when you want to do something so that it looks good, so that it looks like it fits, and you're not just kind of cramming something in just with those minimum space requirements. So.
Yeah, we want this to be something that's welcoming, you know, to people. We want people to feel like they can come to the police department. So, yeah, that aesthetic would be very important.
Did you look at the Parks and Rec building there, that old World War II building? Where is that gonna?
That's not big enough. that space right there, it's not big enough. It also sits down a little bit too low from what we're looking at, so. And kind of the plan that I would discuss for that is we do need, it's Parks and Rec, that building has been kind of condemned, and so we cannot use it to have people in there. I think it's burned twice. But really, in thinking ahead, and I think we've had conversations with the commission before at one point in time, but it is important for us to have a parking area for the cemeteries in the future, because if there's no parking area, and so Parks and Rec will also probably need some, when that building goes away, they will probably need some kinds of structures there for like some mowers and some of those things that would be nice there, but really, we do need parking for the cemetery, kind of like the long-term planning. There is no real parking area, and so that's kind of that was, I think it might even be in the Muni land plan, but we do think that would be a good thing for that space in the future.
I think we need to wrap it up so we can take a little break before our regular meeting. Are there any final comments or questions?
I have one more.
Okay.
Yeah, so R&M is, they've designed these before, right? Police stations.
So R&M actually contracts, like the fire department, they actually contract with specialized engineers that design, like, we have a fire department engineer that came and visited, we have a police department engineer, that's all he does, is that he works with police stations around the United States, and they're basically experts in designing police stations, and so that's, he was, I can't remember his name.
That's all right.
But anyway, he was here, he came and visited, he toured their facility. He's actually the one who did the analysis and all the write-up. If you look at the feasibility study, he did all that work. So yeah, so R&M basically, they have people that they work with, that both of them are, I believe, are from Seattle. And so they've flown up here and they did an analysis, and those are the experts that are able to tell us like what works best.
So the amount that's in that 28 million, I think that's the one, or 24, and that what you have is, what part of that is the design portion? 23 million?
The 23,635,000.
Yeah, what is that? That includes all the design work too? And do you know?
I think they, yeah, it's usually wrapped in there, because they can usually count the design as actually like a certain percentage of the build cost, and so it's kind of like wrapped in there usually. So, and obviously, but again, that 23 million is, we feel like it's, I mean, just on looking at space sizes, if you can reduce that quite a bit, that cost has since come down, because we don't have the DMV space in there, and we don't have the detention space in there.
So it's saying it doesn't include
Oh.
those.
Okay. It doesn't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, let's close this work session,
Okay.
and everyone can take a break before our regular meeting. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
your time and presentation.
you all.
Yeah,
Great,
It's
thank
really
you.
valuable to
Yeah.
have this before the public.
Yep, and please, if you guys have any input or questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to Chief Dinkel or myself, and we'd be more than happy to have further discussion about it.
Thank you. Do I need to hit this again?
Session's over.
Why not?